Hello everybody, I am Zenith and welcome back to Diving Into DuckTales, where we talk about each new episode of the 2017 DuckTales series that is airing on Disney XD. And wow, we have a lot to talk about today, but we also have a lot to talk about in relation to how the show is being run. But before we even get to any of that, I would like to introduce, once again, my co-hosts, Kat Macberrie.
I'm sorry, what? Forgive me, folks. I had a very rough weekend. Thankfully, the good part of my weekend was watching the new DuckTales. So, yes, I am happy because of that. We have a really good episode to talk about. A really good episode to talk about.
And Y2 Stoller.
That's me, and I'm ready as always to be diving into DuckTales again. Woohoo!
Yes, we are going to be diving into DuckTales, but today we have to follow up on something that we talked about last time, and unfortunately it's happening again. We started off last episode talking about how one of the episodes was not aired in the proper order, which is the episode in between The Great Dime Chase and Day Trip of Doom. This episode is supposed to be a Huey-centric episode, and it was moved because there was snow in it, and they want to use it for a Christmas episode. It turns out that this was not a one-time deal. In fact, we have skipped over more than 4 episodes to get the new episode that aired this Saturday, Terra of the Terrafirmians. Now, I decided to look into this because a couple people on Facebook pointed this out to me. So I found this post from Francisco Angones. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, I hope I am, but Francisco is a writer on the 2017 DuckTales. He also worked on Wander Over Yonder and a few other shows. He's worked on some pretty interesting things in the past. So he's involved with the show. And a couple of tweets from him actually shed a lot of light on this matter. He said, and I quote, "Just saw the rearranged lineup of the first couple DuckTales. Hoo boy, that is a wacky order."
Yeah, I'll say. I read the list myself, and I'm like, wait, so we skipped one episode the first time, and now, 3 this time. I'm like, wow. I really hope there's nothing plot major going on in those, because damn. Damn.
Yeah. He further goes on to say, there's an optimal flow that we tried to create with our episode order. Understand there are other programming needs. I don't know what these needs are, but he goes on to list the actual order that they wrote the episodes in. This is from the writer of the show. The first episode was Woo-Oo, which actually was aired in the correct order. Then Day Trip of Doom, the skipped, unannounced Huey episode. Number 4 was The Great Dime Chase. Then it was The Beagle Birthday Massacre. So up until last episode, they only skipped 1 episode. Okay, that's fine. We talked about it. But here's where things get weird. So episode 6 was House of the Lucky Gander. Episode 7 was The Infernal Internship of Mark Beeks, and Episode 8 is The Living Mummies of Toth Ra. Now, I can understand if any one of these episodes was switched around simply because they were utilized as a Halloween episode or whatever, but the episode that we got today, Terror of the Terrafirmians, which is the first one in October, doesn't feel like it was supposed to be aired in this particular manner. We skipped 3 specific episodes, 3 individual episodes, to get to this one that we're talking about today. And we don't know exactly what was missed out. There does seem to be a little bit of character development that we're missing here. And if you talk to some of the other people who've actually seen the new show, seen this episode, they also agreed that it definitely feels like something's missing. And we're going to be talking about that more in detail today. And it's just weird because like they wrote this specifically to space out the character spotlights, the season arcs, the right ratio of Duckbird episodes to globetrotting episodes, but the network seems to have aired this in order to progress the story, and yet, while I don't know if this is mid-season finale or not, this is supposed to be one of the last episodes in the lineup. This is episode 9 out of the order, and granted, again, I don't know if they're taking out any episodes, but we skipped over 3 episodes just to get here. It's weird.
Yeah, I'll say. I mean, it seems like they're rushing through the plot and like leaving all like the either filler or character episodes like for the end, I guess, to lead up to their Christmas episode quotes. So, but it just seems it's so weird though, because I mean, I'm assuming there's nothing of extreme importance in the other episodes, but it's like give the plot a little time to breathe. Because I was a little confused. Like we had the episode with the introduction of Lena, and you know that was all well and good, but then the very next episode it's Webby and Lena again, and it's like, okay, is she gonna show up every episode now, or you know, is this a one-time thing? It was because it was just like I was saying about the Beagle Boys. We get introduced to them one episode, and then like 2 episodes later they're back again. It's like, wow, that was a really quick prison stay for the Beagles, which honestly is no surprise given the original show. But I mean, yeah, I don't understand why they're doing it this way. It's like there's gotta be some space to absorb the information, you know, give others a chance to shine. Because what was it? We haven't seen Scrooge since what was it? The Great Dime Chase, and
Yeah.
and it's making me, and I'm wondering too. It's like, is this part of the mystery they're building up with him, or is this deliberate? I have no idea what's going on. This whole thing baffles me. Like I haven't been this confused since the first season of Power Rangers. Was it Ninja Storm or Ninja Steel or something? Yeah, it was when Saban first brought them back. Everyone was so excited for this, and the very first episode they showed was a character episode. Not the introduction episode, a character episode, which lets everybody confused. And that's how it continued for the first season. They didn't show the pilot until like a month later. So I'm starting to feel like that with this show. I mean, it's not as bad by any means. Don't get me wrong, the episodes we've seen are really good and don't detract from the story too much, but it's still really weird.
I feel like I just hope I'm hoping with Kat that the episodes that we are going to eventually get are just filler that doesn't reveal too much of the plot, or because otherwise there's going to be like plot points in there that we may miss because they air the episodes out of order. And I just hope that with them airing the episodes out of order that it doesn't ruin the overall quality of the show, because sometimes airing episodes out of order can do that. Firefly. So that's my one concern, is that I hope it just doesn't ruin the quality of the show, because I've watched shows before where like you can get away with airing stuff out of order because it's like, it doesn't matter what order it's in, like there's still character development, but it's not like from a continuous, not so much where it's like continuous throughout every single episode, but more that it doesn't like have its need to be watched in a certain order in order to understand it. Like it needs to be, like it has to be presented in that order, where it can just be presented in any order.
Yeah, like my big concern here is twofold. First of all, we're going to actually rewatch these episodes once we finish the season and in the proper order and see if this changes everything. But I can say 2 things right now. First is, it does feel like the character pacing is a little bit off. Like the writer said, like, we didn't get a lot of Huey for a little bit, and now we're not getting a lot of Scrooge for a little bit. And it definitely feels like this is not a function of the show. It feels like things are taken out of order. But another thing I noticed, if you look back to the beginning of this episode, Lena and Webby are very good friends. Now, we did see them become friends at the beginning of the last episode that we talked about. However, the way they're acting is if they've been friends for a very long time. And now that we know that 3 episodes were skipped, I'm wondering how much of that is interaction between Webby and Lena to the point where she was able to infiltrate into the group to that capacity. And the way that Mrs. Beakley is talking to Lena, I mean, admittedly, she has a couple of concerns, but the more she starts talking to Lena, the more it feels like we're missing some development between her and Mrs. Beakley.
Yeah, I kind of felt that way too, but then again, I imagine Webby might have told her all about what happened with the Beagle Boys and, what got her into that situation in the first place. So I imagine once she knows that Lena was responsible right off the bat, she wouldn't trust her. I mean, frankly, if I found that out from my kids, I would react the same way. Not to mention, they went to that movie and she gave Beakley the wrong impression that it was an educational film when actually it was a horror film. So, the evidence like that tends to pile up, and you tend to form an opinion about that person real quickly based on that.
Mm-hmm. So, I hope this doesn't become an issue, but like I said, we will rewatch the episodes in the correct order that they were written once the season concludes, and we'll probably do a final podcast discussing our thoughts and if this changes anything. With that being said, let's talk about the episode itself. Kat, do you want to give us like a brief summary of this episode since you're more familiar with the creatures involved in this episode?
Sure thing. All right, so the whole plot of this episode is that Webby is trying to convince Huey of the existence of these underground creatures called the Terra-firmians, which she believes are these rock monsters that have this whole society underground that are at war with each other and are responsible for earthquakes and other tectonic shifts. Of course, Huey doesn't believe her, obviously, because she has no solid proof, and he's, of course, a slave to the Junior Woodchuck guidebook, which prevents him from pretty much believing in anything that isn't scientific fact, despite the fact that, he has encountered several, monstrous creatures as well as magical creatures within the last 4 episodes we've seen him. So the whole thing is that Lena convinces the 2 of them to go underground and search for the creatures to find out whether or not they're actually real. And they sneak away from the group. Eventually, they all catch up with each other just in time for an earthquake to happen, and it traps them underground. So they're trying to get this train they find free so they could get out of there. Meanwhile, these rock monsters are surrounding them. Launchpad is freaking out because he thinks that everyone's a mole monster, and Beakley is, of course, very highly suspicious and untrusting of Lena, and it's a whole thing about whether or not she's going to allow her to see Webby again. So it's a couple things going on at once. So it's pretty much one of those cases where everyone's trapped, we got to work together to find a way out, and there's a monster coming.
Mm-hmm. I do want to say right off the bat, there are some problems with this episode. I think this episode is a little bit weaker than some of the others that we've talked about. Not that it's a bad episode. We still haven't seen a bad episode yet, but this was the one that I was kind of engaged the least. But before we talk about the problems, I do want to mention a lot of the good things in this episode. First of all, Launchpad.
Oh, God.
Launchpad made this episode because Launchpad saw this movie and now he thinks that everyone is a mole man. And he starts thinking that Dewey is a mole man thanks to his very funny reasoning. And he gets some really funny lines where he talks about he damaged like the entire bathroom because they come up from the sewer pipes. And then later on in the episode, Dewey starts saying that, like, if anyone could be a mole man, then you could be a mole man. Like, he tries to, like, make him feel better, but then Launchpad starts believing that he's a mole man and that mole men are pretty good. So he's like, we must join our mole man brethren. And the only thing that changes his mind at the end of the episode is Mrs. Beakley saying, there are no mole men. And he's like, oh, that makes sense.
Yeah, I noticed his whole thing kind of tied into Huey's thing as well, because whereas Huey strictly believes in logic and will try to logic away anything, Launchpad will think of the most ridiculous things he believes in, like that happens in the movies, and attributes it to that. And it's funny because you have Webby trying to convince Huey that, mystical and fantasy things do and can exist, while Dewey's trying to convince Launchpad that, hey, no, these things don't exist, they're all in your head. So it's a nice little juxtapose between the two.
It is a nice juxtaposition. I loved his interaction. I loved the line, and unfortunately this was kind of spoiled for me for Facebook, and I'm going to have to find a way to get around that in the future, because I know other people actually watch this show before I get a chance to. But I really loved the line where he's just like, I've never crashed a train before. And Mrs. Beakley's like, you could drive it without crashing it. And I'm just like, but it's Launchpad.
There isn't a plane or train that he can't crash.
That's for damn
and
sure.
And he does end up crashing it too. And after the crash, he's like, crashed it. Like, I love that.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I was a little annoyed by it in the original show, just because it's like he's willingly putting people in danger and destroying government property just to keep his record of like crashing stuff, and he's like smug about it too. And in this one, you can attribute it to the fact that he's just an idiot. That that's just what he does, and
that he's just a buffoon.
Yeah, pretty much. I am impressed though with his ability to somehow derail an entire train, even though it was going perfectly straight.
Yeah, like, I was wondering how he was going to be able to do it, but he managed to do it, and it was funny, and everyone got out fine, and, so Launchpad's portion of the episode I thought was fine. I was laughing. I had a very good time. And then we have the other part. There are three different sides to this episode. The other side is Lena and Mrs. Beakley, and how Mrs. Beakley doesn't trust Lena. This I thought was good, but the episode order kind of made it feel a little bit too soon for me. Like, I felt that this definitely should have waited a few episodes. But since it happened, we should mention that this is good character development for Lena, because she has several chances to betray Mrs. Beakley and leave her, and she doesn't take them, because Aunt Magica's shadow appears a couple of times, and she tries to talk her into, leaving Mrs. Beakley be, let her either get crushed by the train or let this happen. Because no one's around to suspect. But at the same time, we see her save Mrs. Beakley a couple of different times, help her out, and it is quite unclear whether or not she's doing it because she feels for Mrs. Beakley or because she's evil, because you do see genuine hesitation on her face a couple of different times, but when she actually does save her, she says to Magica, oh, hey, now I have her trust, I'm in. And that also makes sense. So I have a couple things to add to this in a minute, but Kat, what are your feelings on this part of the plot?
Like you said, I think it came a little too soon, because we just found out at the end of the last episode that Lena is actually evil, and she's working for Magica, and she has this whole big elaborate plan to infiltrate the Duck family and presumably get into the mansion and, take whatever thing she needs from Scrooge or get to Scrooge himself. This is a whole elaborate plan. And then we get to this episode where right off the bat we know that Beakley is suspicious of her, which, is quite justified. And the whole episode is kind of like, it's kind of doing that thing where it's showing, oh, well, she's not all bad. She is trustworthy. But it's like, we just found out she's working for the bad guys. And we're supposed to, feel sympathy for her that Mrs. Beakley is making all these accusations for her. But Mrs. Beakley is right. She is absolutely right to treat her the way she is because we all know this is part of her elaborate scheme. And granted, by the end, she does make the decision to save her as opposed to letting her get crushed, and we kind of think that, okay, well, maybe she might have done it because she feels it's the right thing. And then, of course, at the end, she said, oh, no, it's part of my elaborate plan to gain their trust. It's like, well, you didn't know that was going to happen, so that was kind of like luck on your part. So, I don't know. I didn't really feel for it because it's not one of those things where it's like, you can't judge a book by its cover, because in this case, you absolutely can trust a book by its cover because we know what is actually going on. So, yeah, I didn't completely buy this portion of the story. I just only liked the part where Magica showed up and she actually talked. By the way, she is voiced by Catherine Tate, and I am really damn excited about that because Doctor Who crossover! Woo!
Yes. For those who don't know, Catherine Tate is the person who played Donna Noble in Doctor Who, and David Tennant plays Uncle Scrooge, and for them to be rivals, that's actually pretty interesting.
It's funny because Donna's my favorite companion of the Tennant era, and to hear that she was coming back, I was so damn excited. And the fact that she's his enemy too, to me, it is a natural progression of the relationship based on Doctor Who when you think about it. Like, I know you haven't watched that, right, Zen? You haven't watched that far to it?
No. I was saying in the chat that Donna Noble is my favorite companion and David Tennant's my favorite Doctor.
Oh, okay.
So this is actually really cool.
Okay, I wasn't sure how far you had gotten. I know you aren't completely caught up with the series, so.
Well, because it's funny because when I told Zen about this that Catherine Tate is Donna Noble from Doctor Who, it was like, oh my god.
Yeah, that is a big thing.
It was a big thing.
Like, as far as I've gotten in Doctor Who, I've watched to the middle of Matt Smith, and I stopped watching because of the way the show was being run. I haven't seen a lot of Peter Capaldi, but my favorite era was the Tennant era, and while it had bad individual episodes like Love and Monsters, Tennant and Noble made this show for me, and to see them in this role is great. Mm-hmm. Eric, what are your thoughts on this portion of the story before I say a couple of my points?
I do agree with everyone here in that it did feel a little too soon for Lena to try to, make herself look good in front of Mrs. Beakley. I feel, part of me, in saying that, it feels like there's probably at least one other episode that we're missing that has Lena in there in one of their adventures somewhere, and I feel like that's going to show up, and that's going to kind of throw everything off. But I mean, if it ends up being like, with Lena's plot point, just another filler as a way to her to bond more with Huey, Dewey, and Louie, because when we first see Lena in the Beagle Birthday Massacre, Lena is kind of bonding more with Webby as opposed to Huey, Dewey, and Louie, because Huey, Dewey, and Louie are like, all right, you're cool or whatever, but she hasn't really had time to really get to know the other boys. So part of me feels like when we do get to see more episodes, I have a feeling that there's going to be another episode with Lena, her hanging out with the boys more. So, and I don't know if that's going to entirely throw off the whole the continuity per se, but I mean it shouldn't, hopefully. But like I said, given that we're given this situation with Lena and Mrs. Beakley so soon, with her like, oh, don't trust Lena, but Lena is, working for Magica, I could see why there's a lot of confusion.
All right, now I do want to state a couple points that I found interesting about this episode in this particular plot thread. So, Aunt Magica's shadow appears a couple of times. Now, this is interesting to me because she's appeared in direct sunlight many different times, and yet, for some reason, when like a spotlight is shown on her, Aunt Magica's shadow appears behind her, and she ducks out to the left to avoid people seeing the shadow. Now, they do show at the beginning of the episode she's out during the daytime, so it's not that we've only seen her during the night. I would have, after the Beagle Birthday Massacre, I mean, we'd only seen her at night, so the shadow thing would have made sense. But, yeah, it's kind of weird how it only appears at certain points.
Yeah, I am a bit confused as to how the whole talisman thing works with summoning her, because they don't really make it clear, because the first time you see it happen, she summons her with the amulet, making you thinking either she's in the amulet or she's transferring her essence through the amulet. But then in this one, she kind of summons herself of her own free will, and, she also disappears at will. And it's weird because I keep thinking, like, well, how does this thing work? Is she actually in the amulet and could come out whenever she wants? Does Lena have to summon her? Is she a part of Lena? Is she, like, I don't know how to put it, because, I mean, I know about the shadow thing, sort of, because they had an episode in the original series where Magica cast a spell on her shadow so that it became sentient, and she used it to sneak into Scrooge's vault to steal his dime. However, the shadow failed the first time, and after it gets berated by Magica, it steals one of her spells, and not only does it break free of her, but it actually becomes more powerful and monstrous and can actually make shadow demons of its own. So I'm kind of thinking that's what they were doing with this, but I'm still not sure. Like, I don't know if, like, one of the episodes in between might explain more of that, if Lena does show up in them, but yeah, I'm really a bit confused now as to how the whole thing works.
Yeah, that was one of the things I noticed. There were two other things that kind of struck out to me. One of them is also related to Lena. One is related to Mrs. Beakley, and this is a small point, so I'm going to say it first. How come Mrs. Beakley didn't know to use a crowbar on the train if she's a spy?
Yeah, I'm a bit confused about that too. I mean, she knows how to hook up a boat. She knows how to hook up electricity to power a boat. She knows Taekwondo, but she doesn't know how to use a crowbar. It's like,
I mean, I know she was in the heat of the moment, but, like, Lena, just quickly says, if you want to vandalize, you got to do it right. And that kind of says to me that they're really... It almost feels like this episode was painting her stereotypically, and this felt a little bit more cliche to me than the other episodes in their use of Lena as the bad girl stereotype. Last time in the Beagle Birthday Massacre, like, she didn't say, like, stereotypical things like, oh, you gotta vandalize right and stuff like that. And it feels like that small scene was a little bit forced.
I guess they needed to give her something to do, something to contribute, because, I mean, it seemed like Beakley could have easily done that all on her own. She was just keeping Lena nearby so she wouldn't cause any more trouble. But yeah, it was a bit stereotypical, and, like, she even, like, kind of describes herself as stereotypical. It's like, oh yeah, blame the rebel who plays by her own rules. It's like, I don't know. I didn't think it was that big a deal. I mean, again, they had to give her something to do other than, saving her at the last minute. So it's not that big deal. And considering that, Beakley, she is a spy, but she's also, she's also like sort of a refined woman who probably is used to the finer things and, probably working with more upscale people who use gadgets and stuff. So to use something as crude as a crowbar, I guess she, again, that's more of like a thug thing, and she probably isn't used to it. That's how I kind of ration it.
I can understand that. This is a small point, and if you take a look at Beakley's character, it does fit, because she's still very prim and proper and uses gadgets, and she doesn't have any of her gadgets with her. So I can understand that. The final point I want to bring up before we move on to the third storyline in the episode is that Lena uses the magic of the amulet during the episode. Now, she uses it to levitate the train to save Mrs. Beakley. Part of it, it's kind of interesting the way they use it, because at first she's struggling to lift the train, but then the shadow of Magica goes away, and she's enveloped in a bigger glow. So I'm wondering if it takes a larger portion of her magic to summon Magica, in that, like, that's how things happened. Again, like we said earlier, we don't know exactly how the summoning of Aunt Magica works in this universe, because we haven't been explained anything since the last episode. But I did notice that her magic increased when the shadow went away.
Yeah, that was pretty fascinating, because, I mean, she used a pretty good deal of magic. I mean, she lifted an entire train by herself. I mean, that is a great feat in and of itself. Like, I am curious as, like, what else she can actually do, because, I mean, when you think about it, had she not been leading them on throughout that whole Beagle Boy incident, like, she probably could have taken down the entire group by herself. Like, I am really curious to see if, like, where they go with this and what other, like, feats of magic that she performs, because that was pretty cool. And I am interested to see, like, how it works exactly, if it's purely through the talisman or if she has some inner magic that the talisman brings out.
Mm-hmm. Eric, do you have anything to add to any of these points?
It is interesting with Lena with the amulet, because now we know that the amulet is not, because when we first saw the amulet in the Beagle Birthday Massacre, the amulet was just, to summon Magica. But now we know that the amulet has, has other things, like it gives her, like, magical powers and stuff, like her being able to lift the train. So I think it's going to be interesting going forward to see if Lena's going to use the amulet for, like, other stuff, as a way to kind of help everybody out. And is it going to be a plot point later on where they find out that the amulet has magical properties and stuff? So, or is Lena going to try and hide her magic abilities? So it's interesting. And also, I still like the fact that Catherine Tate is voicing Magica, who I just want to take a moment to mention that, because she does it so well, and because I'm not familiar with her doing any voice work prior, but she sounds wonderful in this role. It's like, it's perfect for it. I don't know if the casting is deliberate, just to happen the fact that David Tennant and Catherine Tate were both in Doctor Who together. I don't know if that's deliberate or not, but it works. It really works.
Mm-hmm. Well, you know what they say. You either die a companion, or you live long enough to save the universe twice, get your memory erased, and then become the villain. Like I said, it's the natural progression.
Personally, I did like her in the role, but I need to hear more of her speaking. She only had a couple lines, and she delivered them fine, but I don't like to judge just on a small performance. I think she did great. I just need more time. Again, I love the actress anyway, so it's a moot point.
I think we'll get more as the show progresses. Most definitely.
I will say, if you guys hadn't pointed it out to me, I probably wouldn't have known it was her. Like, I know it's because we only heard a small portion, but yeah, I could not detect that it was her speaking. And actually, like, her voice, I mean, don't get me wrong, I love her voice, I love what they're doing for it. It's just a bit of a change for me, because again, I'm so used to the old Magica, who was voiced by June Foray, doing her Natasha impression. So hearing her without a Russian accent is a bit weird, but I'm sure I'll get used to it soon enough.
Mm-hmm. So let's talk about the other third of the episode. The first plot I thought was great with Launchpad. The second plot I think has problems given the context of this episode and not knowing the other 3 episodes or 4 episodes that we've skipped because of things being out of order. This I'm not entirely sure how I feel about it. I think half of it works and half of it doesn't. But then again, I don't know how well it fits, because this other third of the episode is all about Huey. And this is the first Huey-centric plot that we've gotten in the entire show. And Huey's been absent for a couple of episodes, mostly because they keep skirting around his episodes. They took out one of his already. So we don't know a lot of the context of how he acted to in those previous episodes, and that's kind of hard for me to judge. But in this plot, Huey is being all scientific. He's basically the really nerdy one. He has his Junior Woodchuck handbook, and he's all saying, like, if it's in the handbook, it's real. And I do find parts of it annoying, because he's seen mystical things. He's seen monsters, and he's logged them in his Woodchuck book. But he keeps talking about tectonic plates rather than monsters, and I'm like, but you've seen a headless horse. You've seen a headless horse. Like,
You've seen a golden dragon. You've seen, like, stuff that was going on in Atlantis. You've been to Atlantis. That's not supposed to exist.
And so, like, it's kind of weird how they portray him. Like, they try to make him out to be the one that's all about science until he sees it. But he's seen a lot of mystical stuff, and I'm not sure entirely how well this works. And he spends a lot of the episode arguing with Webby, and Webby's talking about the Terra-firmians and how they're the ones who created these tunnels underground, and she tells all these stories. Admittedly, I do understand why he's skeptical of her drawings, because a lot of the times when she talks about stuff in her book, she has drawings in crayon, and it does kind of feel like she's embellishing on things. But if you take things in context of the previous episodes we've seen, Webby's always been right. Webby's the one who knows what's going on. Webby's the one who helped out every single episode. She's the one who helped you out in the Beagle Birthday Massacre. So why are you doubting her now?
Yeah, I gotta wonder if something happened in the on-air episodes that caused him to distrust her, or he was on an adventure that caused him to, like, you know, become skeptical of the things that he's been seeing. Because, yeah, he was, like, in, like, extreme denial the entire episode. It's like, well, if it isn't in the book, then it's not real. And he even adds stuff in the book himself, so he's a hypocrite. So I don't, like, understand his, like, reasoning throughout all this. Like, I get it, a lot of people base their decisions and plans around logic, and honestly, that's a good thing to do. It's good to, you know, look at things from a practical perspective. But in this case, he was, like, taking it to the 11th degree, and it was so annoying, because, I mean, I get it's also part of, like, the joke about the Junior Woodchuck guidebook, because it was basically the Deus Ex Machina of the original series, because it always had the answer to everything, even stuff that it really should have no knowledge about. But in this case, like, dear God, it was like it was like he treated it like it was like the Bible on life. And he was like, anything that he saw, he kept trying to twist it up in order to justify his beliefs about it. Like, and I get it kind of falls into what happened with Launchpad. You know, they were both acting out of fear, but while Launchpad was using his fear to sort of, you know, sort of like calm himself by saying, oh, well, at least I know about it, I can at least fight against it. In this case, Huey's like, oh, I can reason it away, and thus it doesn't exist. It's just, it was so annoying and so frustrating, because you know that he knows better, but he just is keeping himself in this little bubble that, oh, well, only the book knows this, so it's the only thing I could trust, even though I've seen this stuff with my own eyes, and I know people that know this stuff. Is just, oh, dear God. Like, I really hope that there's a reason for this, and they didn't just invent this whole thing just to cause conflict, because even the reason for them going to find out about this is kind of weak. I mean, they pretty much do it on a dare, not because, you know, anything was at stake. And they ended up getting themselves almost killed for it. It's ridiculous.
So, yeah, like, this part, I think there's part of a good plot in here. And it really says a lot when we don't know if this is character development from before, continuation. Like, this is why I really wonder why they aired the episodes out of order. With that being said, it's not all bad. I think that there are definitely really weak parts, and there are parts where he's annoying. But there's also some really funny bits with Webby in it, and there's, I feel like there's actually some really good jokes that Huey makes, and it's actually nice to see his character for once, outside of a group episode, because when he's in the group episodes, he doesn't really do much. It's funny how Dewey and Louie get the most to do, even when they're in group episodes, whereas Huey is just like on the sidelines. And the one episode that we do get to see him, half of it is kind of annoying. So I don't know. Eric, what are your thoughts on that?
I do, and while I agree with a lot of what you guys have been saying, I do feel like, as far as like with like this is like the first like Huey episode that we're getting for the series, and I feel like it's kind of a bad first impression because it kind of makes Huey kind of look like an idiot. But I also feel that we're kind of losing some context here because we're jumping ahead like 3 episodes and we haven't seen them yet. They haven't aired them yet. So while the Huey Webby part does have some good moments, I just feel like we're not getting, like, we don't have everything as far as like Huey's character goes, because this is really the first Huey episode that we've gotten, and they already set aside the other Huey episode for till Christmas, so it's kind of hard to say.
Yeah, I agree. Like, this was a very poor at first episode for Huey. It's kind of an injustice when you think about it, because I'm certain like his logical scientific based fact nature will come into play and will actually be like the reason why they don't die in certain episodes, because like I said, it's good to be practical. I really wish we gotten at least one Huey episode before we got this, because dear God, like every time he spoke, like trying to explain something away, I wanted to freaking slap him. And it's made worse by the fact that he's like cowardly on top of it. Like, I guess that's why he doesn't do much, because his brothers are a lot more daring than he is. But oh man, like there are times where I was like amused. Like I was basically like Louie was that entire episode, pretty much just watching the chaos unfold and thinking, okay, how much worse is this going to get before he finally realizes, hey, maybe I was wrong about all this.
Louie was the best in this episode. Oh my God, he's eating popcorn and he's not taking anyone's side, but he's creating chaos. I love the character direction for Louie, because they're basically making him into someone who's just, he loves to see chaos unfold. So he's just like, he's saying whatever the other person wants to hear and just eating popcorn.
I gotta say, I admire his ability to pull popcorn out of thin air. Like, yeah,
multiple different times.
Yes. I mean, he kind of explains it away the first time. It's like, what? They gave out free refills, but then he loses his bucket of popcorn, but then toward the end of the episode, he has another one in his hand. It's like, why can't I have that ability?
So, I think that this episode is a bit mixed. This is the first episode where I really felt like there were problems. It was still enjoyable to watch. I don't want anyone to think that it wasn't. This is not a bad episode yet. This is just the weakest that we've gotten so far. And while a third of it is a little bit annoying, and I feel some of it is a little bit rushed, the rest of it is great. It's a lot of fun. The jokes hit on point. It's not quite as quotable an episode as before, like there's no Captain Lost or something like that, but there's enough character and there's enough humor on display to keep it going. If this is indeed supposed to be like a mid-season or a season finale, I still think that this is a little bit odd placement. Granted, this could be just all we've been shown for the episodes thus far, and they probably have a lot more planned, and I don't know exactly how they're going to work it out, but there isn't really all that much plot in this episode. The monsters themselves, the Terra-firmians, turn out to be very not scary. Like they're very cute boulders, and they don't know what humans are. Like it's all a misunderstanding, and I think that's a little bit cliche too. So that's kind of weak.
Yeah, honestly, I thought the Terrafirmians were the weakest part of the episode because I mean they're featured prominently in the title. They're supposed to be the big baddies for this, or the big monster for this, and yet we only see him for what, 2 minutes? Not even the entire episode.
Yeah, we barely see them, and when we do, it turns out, oh yeah, they're not evil, but why are they making all this chaos? Why are they surrounding the people? It's like, it's kind of weird, and there's not a lot that's explained with the Terrafirmians. They just show up and like, oh, you must be the prince of the human country. Well, let us show you the way out. Like, it kind of felt a little bit Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah, I mean, like I should probably explain my journey with researching the Terrafirmians. So it turns out I watched this episode a long time ago when I was little, but I had completely forgotten about it. And then after I watched this episode, and I'm like, huh. So they had these cool, menacing looking underground things, but they actually are these cute little wobbles like the whole time. Like, I need context for this. So I went back and I watched the episode, and slowly everything came back to me. And by the time the episode was done, I'm like, okay, the new episode had potential, but they wasted it. So if I may briefly sum the original episode, Scrooge is worried that his money bin is gonna get torn apart by the earthquakes that are happening around Duckburg, so he goes underground to find out what's causing them. He runs into the Terrafirmians, who are these like cutesy little like colored boulders, and the whole reason they're causing earthquakes is because they have something called the games going on, where they all take turns hurling themselves at like stalactite columns, and whoever makes the biggest earthquake wins their trophy. And that's the entire plot. And Scrooge pretty much stops them by stealing their trophy and causing them to like chase him to the surface. And like they're pretty much just the bad guys for that, although it's implied that they're not bad all along, but yeah, they're bad because they're causing earthquakes for no reason other than to amuse themselves and putting the entire surface world at risk. So by the time the episode was done, it's like, yeah, I'm sick of these guys. I don't want to see them anymore. Thank God there's no episodes of this. And so when I saw this episode, it's like, okay, well, I don't see much of them, but hey, they look different. They look cool. But oh no, it turns out all along they're still all cutesy and colorful and wobbly. So yeah. It's like, I'm glad there wasn't much of them, but at the same time, I thought they would get a better upgrade than this. It feels like wasted potential, because even though they looked like potatoes dressed as Halloween decorations, they're still menacing. You know, they were like almost crushed the kids to death. So I don't know. I feel like this was like a sort of like a throwaway thing, just another reference they wanted to stick in there just because.
It felt like the episode was supposed to go one way, and something happened, because like there's a lot of really good build-up for the Terrafirmians, but because we have these 3 little plot threads going around at the same time, we didn't have enough time to develop the characters and develop the Terrafirmians, and so it's just, I don't know if this is a joke. I don't know if this is like the whole point of the episode. It definitely feels anticlimactic, and if this is just a filler episode, that's fine. But there was plot points in this episode, and I think what we really need is the context of the 4 episodes that we skipped. Again, this is enjoyable, but it just feels like there's a couple things missing. Like, the Beagle Birthday Massacre was, for the most part, a filler episode. Like, there are plot points in there, but it felt like, for the most part, it was having a lot of good fun with it. It was fun, it was enjoyable. Yes, there was that big plot thing at the end, but if you take that out, it was just a fun episode. And the way it was done in a way to make these villains fun, and to make them also menacing at points. So when you compare it to this one, this definitely feels a lot weaker. I don't know. Eric, what is your final thoughts on Terror of the Terrafirmians?
It felt like a very ho-hum episode. Like, it felt like I kind of sort of knew what they were going with this. How, like, the Terrafirmians, like, oh, they're these big bad baddies, but it turns out they're actually nice, and they're like, it turns into the whole, oh, they're more afraid of you than you are of them, like, trope that's kind of been done before, and the only reason why we get to see this now is because, because as I was recording it, like Disney XD that Saturday morning, they were doing like their sort of like Halloween episodes for that block that morning, so they included this one in. But like it kind of felt like it's like stuff that I've seen before in like other shows, with the whole, like I said, with the whole, they're more afraid of you than you are of them, and how it's all one big giant misunderstanding. So it's like kind of ho-hum, but I wouldn't say it's a bad episode. It's not a bad episode. It's just not my favorite of all the episodes I've seen so far.
And, Kat, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, I was a bit disappointed with this episode too. I mean, don't get me wrong, it's still good. The writing's still great. I like a lot of the jokes and stuff. It's just the message they were trying to convey about, trying to not fully rely on logic and learn and believing that there is a magical forces beyond our understanding, and that not everything needs an explanation. I felt the message was kind of botched with this, because I think back to the episode of My Little Pony where Twilight's trying to understand Pinky's her Pinky sense, and being completely skeptical and trying to logic it away until the very end when she admits that she can't understand it, and that's perfectly fine. But with this, it doesn't happen, because it's like Huey doesn't learn a lesson. He just says, okay, well, it's in my book, which means it's real now, which means I'm still right and we're fully relying on this book. It's like, no, you did not learn anything. Like, nobody learned anything in this. And even like the whole message with learning not to judge someone by their cover, it's again botched, like mostly with Lena's subplot, because while Mrs. Beakley accepts her by the end, we know that she was right to be skeptical of her in the first place, and we know this is a mistake for her to trust her. And the whole thing with the Terrafirmians, again, while it turns out that, yeah, they were these cutesy guys who were just as scared as they were the entire time, they still caused a lot of problems. They still almost got the kids killed. They were perfectly justified for them to be afraid of them. Like, it just, I just felt that there was a lot of missed opportunity with this, a lot of poor writing in terms of the morals. Like, again, I referenced that joke I made in the past one. We thank you for watching No Moral Theater. That's pretty much what this was.
For me, I think this was just okay. There are definitely some really enjoyable jokes, some really good humor, but it definitely feels like a step back from the previous 5 episodes that we've talked about. Again, I would not call it a bad episode personally, but this is the weakest that we've seen, and it just feels like there are good ideas here, but they're kind of smushed into one package, unless things change with the episodes that we haven't seen. And that's why we really need to do kind of a final thoughts thing once we can actually watch them in the correct order. Because we've had a very good progression up until now, and things are just not feeling right for this episode, which is partially because we've been skipping episodes. So, with all of that being said, I think that I'm going to wait and reserve judgment until the end. But for right now, this is not one of my favorite episodes. I think this is probably my least favorite episode thus far. And it's even with a lot of the jokes, there's just not enough to really carry it for a full episode. With all that being said, I'm Zenith Rule.
I'm Kat Macberrie.
I'm Eric Y2 Staller.
And is there anything else that you guys want to add before I close us out?
Just that I hope that they do their best to re-air the episodes in order, or at least, put things into context better, and just that I hope the next episode is better than this one. That's pretty much all I have to say.
All right, so with all that being said, have a good one, guys, and just remember, let's do the time warp again.
TTFN, ta-ta for now.
It's just a jump to the left.
Hey, this is Megami33. Thank you for watching Zenith Will Review. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more awesome videos. If you like what you see, check out the Patreon page at patreon.com/Zenith Will Review.
Okay, so we got a lot to talk about today. We have to talk about pants and cheese and Kingdom Hearts and a lot of other stuff that has nothing to do with DuckTales. That's what this podcast is going to be. Just nothing about DuckTales. Just everything about other things. Even though it's called Diving Into DuckTales, we're going to talk about everything else.
Yay, false advertising.
Turbo cheese pants.
All right. Turbo cheese pants.